For the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. For the murder of Heather Wilkinson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Gail Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Don Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. All sentences are to be served concurrently. The total effective sentence is life imprisonment.
A life sentence. The cold words of a judge delivered to a woman found guilty of taking the lives of her own family with one of the world's deadliest mushrooms. How could someone turn against those closest to them in such a calculated way? Why did a family gathering in country Victoria end in tragedy that shocked an entire nation? Stay with us as we take you through the case step by step, uncovering the story behind the headlines and exploring how the justice system reached its final decision. In the small rural town of Leongatha, set among the rolling hills of Victoria's Gippsland region, everyday life is defined by close ties and a strong sense of community. It is here that Erin Patterson, a woman in her early 50s, had been living quietly for several years. Known locally through her extended family, she was connected by marriage to one of the area's long-standing households. That family included Don and Gail Patterson, a couple in their 70s who were well respected in both Leongatha and neighbouring Korumburra. They were people who had built enduring relationships within the community, particularly through education and voluntary work. Alongside them was Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, and Heather's husband, Ian, a church minister in his late 60s who had given decades of service to parishioners across the district. Together, these relatives formed a close network that stretched between two neighbouring towns. Their lives were intertwined not only by blood and marriage, but also through shared values and a commitment to their communities. The Patterson family had established a reputation for kindness and involvement, while the Wilkinsons were equally recognised for their pastoral support and reliability. Leongatha itself is a modest township, about 135 kilometres southeast of Melbourne, surrounded by farmland and country roads. It is a place where long-established families and newcomers often overlap, and where social connections can run deep. In such a setting, personal relationships carry weight, and bonds within extended families are rarely separate from the life of the wider town. This environment forms the backdrop to the events that would later capture national attention. From here, the focus moves into the circumstances that began to place strain on those family relationships and the reasons why tensions grew within what had appeared to be a united household. Family life in regional Victoria is often shaped by both closeness and pressure. In Erin Patterson's case, her personal circumstances had become increasingly unsettled. She was living in Leongatha while separated from her husband, Simon Patterson, and the breakdown of that marriage had placed strain on the wider family network. Relatives who had once gathered easily now faced moments of unease. Long-standing bonds were complicated by disagreements and a sense of distance that had grown over time. The Patterson household, through Don and Gail, remained central to those connections. They had been parents, in-laws, and community figures whose opinions carried weight. Alongside them were Heather and Ian Wilkinson, linked not only by family but by years of shared responsibilities and traditions. As relationships shifted, discussions around loyalty, support and trust became more difficult to manage. These undercurrents were not unusual in extended families, but they were significant in shaping how individuals related to one another. Against this backdrop, Erin took steps to bring the group together. She extended an invitation to Don and Gail Patterson and to Heather and Ian Wilkinson, suggesting a meal at her home in Leongatha. On its surface, it appeared to be a gesture aimed at reconciliation and reconnection, providing an opportunity to sit down collectively after months of tension. For relatives accustomed to meeting within familiar circles, such a proposal was not unexpected. The decision to gather, however, carried more weight than simply sharing time around a table. It represented an attempt to navigate the shifting dynamics of a family that had once seemed united. The invitation itself would become an important marker in understanding how events unfolded. In the days before the gathering, Erin Patterson went into town to buy what she needed. From the butcher, she obtained a cut of beef, and from local shops she purchased pastry, herbs, and vegetables. With these items, she also obtained mushrooms, later identified as deathcap, known in Australia as one of the most poisonous varieties in existence. Just a small amount of the toxin contained in this species is capable of causing fatal liver failure if consumed. Back at her home in Leongatha, Patterson began preparing a beef Wellington. The beef was seared and cooled, the pastry rolled and set aside. The mushrooms were processed to form part of the filling. A food dehydrator was brought into use during that step, treating the mushrooms before they were worked into the mixture. The dish was built piece by piece. The meat was coated with the mushroom filling, then enclosed within layers of pastry. It was brushed and sealed, ready to be baked. By the time the preparation was finished, the Wellington was complete, waiting to be presented at the table. What began with an ordinary shopping trip had produced a meal that carried an extraordinary risk. Within the layers of that dish lay a toxic element, one of the deadliest natural substances found in the environment. The meal now stood prepared, and the moment was approaching when it would be placed before the family. On 29th of July 2023, the Patterson and Wilkinson families came together at Erin Patterson's home in Leongatha. The gathering was centred around the beef Wellington she had prepared, placed at the table as the main dish. Don and Gail Patterson, Heather and Ian Wilkinson accepted the invitation, and together with Erin, they shared the meal. In the hours that followed, the four guests began to feel unwell. What started as discomfort developed into acute illness. Within 24 hours, all were admitted to hospital with severe symptoms of liver failure. Despite intensive medical care, Don, Gail and Heather did not survive. Ian Wilkinson endured critical illness, ultimately requiring a liver transplant to save his life. Erin herself reported milder symptoms and was discharged after a short period under observation. Once back at home, her actions took on a different focus. A food dehydrator, which had been used in the preparation of the mushrooms, was removed from the house. Erin drove to the Coonawarra transfer station, where the appliance was discarded amongst electronic waste. Around the same time, the mobile phone she handed to police had been cleared of data, leaving only a reset device with little record of her communications or movements. These moments marked the shift from a family meal to the start of a series of events that would be examined closely in the months and years ahead. The gathering that began as an apparent gesture of reconciliation had ended in tragedy, and from this point, as the patients were admitted, doctors at the regional hospital recognised the signs of poisoning. The pattern of illness was unusual, with several members of the same family presenting together. The medical team alerted authorities, formally notifying police that the cases appeared to involve mushroom toxicity. At the same time, relatives of the victims made their own contact with police, reporting that the group had attended a shared meal in Leongatha before becoming unwell. The combination of hospital notification and family reports ensured that law enforcement was quickly informed. These calls marked the official start of the case. What began as a medical emergency was now registered as a matter for police attention, recorded as a suspected incident of food poisoning with fatal potential. The report provided the basis for officers to respond, setting in motion their first attendance at the scene. After receiving notification from the hospital, supported by information that the group had recently shared a meal at Erin Patterson's home, Victoria Police moved quickly. Officers were dispatched to Leongatha and arrived at the property soon after the reports were made. On arrival, the house was secured. The immediate area was cordoned off to prevent disturbance and to preserve the site in its original state. Uniformed officers established a perimeter while detectives prepared to take control of the scene. The residence was formally designated as a crime scene. Standard procedures were put in place, with access restricted to authorised personnel only. Equipment for the examination was brought in, and arrangements were made to document the condition of the kitchen and surrounding spaces. This first attendance marked the transition from report to investigation. With the scene secured, police were positioned to begin the detailed process of searching for material that might explain the sudden illness of 4 family members. The groundwork had been laid for the forensic and investigative steps that would follow. Detectives from Victoria Police's Homicide Squad began a careful examination of the Patterson residence once the scene was declared secure. Forensic officers moved systematically through the kitchen and adjoining rooms, documenting the condition of the space before collecting any material. Every item was photographed, labelled and sealed to ensure the integrity of the evidence. On the kitchen bench and in the refrigerator, containers with portions of food were located. These included remnants of the beef Wellington that had been served at the family gathering. Samples of the dish were taken away for laboratory analysis. Utensils used in the preparation, including knives, chopping boards and pans, were also seized. The approach was methodical, aimed at capturing everything that might reveal the source of the sudden illness. Toxicology tests carried out on the food confirmed the presence of Amanita phalloides, more commonly known as the death cap mushroom. This finding provided a scientific explanation for the symptoms experienced by the victims. It was noted that even small amounts of the toxin could cause irreversible liver damage, consistent with the outcomes faced by those who had eaten the meal. In parallel with the forensic work, investigators reviewed CCTV footage from the local transfer station at Koonwarra. The vision showed Erin Patterson discarding a food dehydrator in the days immediately after the lunch. Detectives regarded this appliance as relevant given its role in the preparation of mushrooms. When police requested her electronic devices, Erin supplied a mobile phone. Examination revealed that it had been reset, leaving little accessible information about her calls or movements. This action limited the digital trail but was formally recorded as part of the case file. Taken together, the evidence established that Erin was the sole person responsible for preparing the meal. No other family members had been involved in the cooking. This conclusion gave investigators a clear direction, setting the foundation for the next phase of the case. On the 2nd November 2023, after months of gathering evidence and reviewing the results of forensic testing, Victoria Police moved to arrest Erin Patterson. Detectives attended her home in Leongatha during the morning, informing her that she was being taken into custody in connection with the deaths of Don and Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson, as well as the critical illness of Ian Wilkinson. She was transported to a police station for formal processing. The arrest was conducted in accordance with procedure, with Patterson advised of her rights and the charges she was facing. Later that day, the Office of Public Prosecutions confirmed that she would be formally charged. The indictment contained 3 counts of murder, reflecting the deaths of Don, Gail and Heather. In addition, 1 count of attempted murder was laid, relating to the survival of Ian Wilkinson, who had endured life-threatening illness and undergone a liver transplant. These charges represented the most serious offences under Victorian criminal law. From that point, Erin Patterson was held in custody. Bail was refused and she was remanded to await her first court appearance. The arrest marked a decisive shift in the case, moving it from the investigative stage into the judicial process that would follow. The matter proceeded to trial in the Supreme Court of Victoria, Melbourne. Proceedings commenced on 29 April 2025 before Justice Christopher Beale and a jury of 12. Across the following weeks, the court heard a detailed account of what occurred in Leongatha, together with the scientific and medical material that framed the case. The Crown alleged that Erin Patterson prepared and served a beef Wellington that contained death cap mushrooms. Jurors were taken through the sequence of events surrounding the family meal and the rapid onset of illness. Treating clinicians and specialist toxicologists gave evidence about amatoxin poisoning, its typical progression to liver failure, and how the symptoms reported by the 4 guests aligned with that pattern. Forensic scientists described the handling of food remnants collected from the home and the results of laboratory testing. CCTV vision was played to the jury showing Patterson disposing of a food dehydrator at the Coonawarra transfer station in the days after the lunch. Digital forensics officers explained that a mobile phone tendered by Patterson had been reset, leaving limited recoverable data. The jury also heard from family and community witnesses who outlined relationships and the circumstances leading up to the gathering. The defence maintained that Patterson did not knowingly serve poisonous mushrooms. Counsel challenged aspects of the Crown's case, testing the reliability of the scientific findings and the inferences said to arise from post-event conduct. The jury was reminded that the burden of proof remained with the Crown and that the standard was beyond reasonable doubt. In summing up, His Honour directed the jury on circumstantial evidence, intent, and the proper use of expert testimony. After retiring to consider their verdicts, the jury returned on 7 July 2025. They found Erin Patterson guilty of 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The case then moved to the sentencing phase. On 8 September 2025, the Supreme Court of Victoria reconvened for sentencing. Justice Christopher Beale delivered his remarks to a packed courtroom, with the proceedings broadcast publicly in line with recent changes to transparency in serious criminal matters. His Honour outlined the gravity of the offences, noting that 3 lives had been lost and a 4th had been placed at risk in circumstances that were both deliberate and preventable. The court recognised the enduring impact on surviving family members and the wider community, describing the consequences as a wave of grief that would extend across generations. In determining sentence, Justice Beale referred to the jury's verdicts of guilty on 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He emphasised that these were among the most serious crimes known to Victorian law, requiring a response that marked both punishment and deterrence. Erin Patterson was sentenced to life imprisonment. The court fixed a non-parole period of 33 years, meaning she will not be eligible to apply for release until 2056, when she will be in her 80s. The judge explained that this represented the minimum time she must serve, reflecting the seriousness of the offending and the absence of mitigating factors. The sentencing hearing concluded with Patterson being remanded to the custody of Corrections Victoria to begin her term at a maximum security facility. For the families of the victims, the court's decision brought a measure of finality, formally closing a case that had started with a family lunch in regional Victoria and ended with one of the state's heaviest penalties. The sentencing of Erin Patterson drew an immediate response from the community. Outside the Supreme Court of Victoria, members of the public gathered alongside reporters, many expressing relief that the judicial process had reached its conclusion. For residents of Leongatha and Korumburra, the decision within hours, tributes flowed for Don and Gail Patterson and for Heather Wilkinson. Local churches prepared services of remembrance, and floral tributes were placed at community centres where the victims had once been active. Neighbours spoke of families left grieving and of the gap that would remain in towns where personal connections run deep. Government and law enforcement officials also addressed the outcome. Victoria Police described the investigation as complex and emotionally difficult, noting the strain placed on officers working closely with affected families. The state government extended condolences, with ministers emphasising both the tragedy of the loss and the importance of public confidence in the justice system. The broader community reaction was marked by empathy for the surviving family, including Ian Wilkinson, who endured critical illness and has continued to live with its effects. Commentators highlighted the rare and confronting nature of the case, observing how it had drawn national attention and stirred conversations well beyond regional Victoria. The sentencing was therefore not only the close of a trial, but also a moment of collective reflection. In towns where the victims were known personally, and across the state where the story had been followed closely, the outcome became part of a wider discussion about trust, safety, and the lasting impact of crime on community life. The conclusion of this case has prompted reflection far beyond the courtroom. At its centre are 3 lives lost and 1 forever altered, but around it stands an entire community reminded of how fragile trust within families and towns can be. The events in Leongatha were not only a criminal matter, but also a story that unsettled a country accustomed to seeing family homes as places of safety. One lesson is the importance of vigilance when it comes to food safety. The death cap mushroom, though rare, is known in Victoria and carries a lethal risk. Health authorities have long warned of its dangers, and this tragedy has underlined those warnings with devastating clarity. The message is simple: unidentified wild mushrooms should never be consumed, no matter how familiar they may appear. Another lesson lies in the way the justice system responds. The investigation, the trial, and the sentencing all demonstrated the care taken to balance evidence with fairness, even in circumstances that drew intense public attention. For communities, it is a reassurance that processes are in place to address acts of serious harm and that accountability will follow. More broadly, the case has shown how crime can ripple through regional life. In towns where connections are close, the impact is felt in schools, churches, and local gatherings, long after the verdict has been delivered. The story has become a reminder of resilience as much as it is a record of loss. In the end, the lesson is both practical and human. The practical: heed the warnings and respect the risks that nature can pose. The human: remember the cost of broken trust and the value of supporting communities as they carry the weight of tragedy. These are the truths that remain once the courtroom doors have closed. What do you think about this case that has captured national attention? Does the sentence reflect justice, and what lessons should we as a community take from it? We would like to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your perspective, join the discussion, and if you want to follow more in-depth reports on Australia's most significant criminal trials, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel.